Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to look at both Teresa Suezanne Branscomb, age 20, although that's really hard to find on the internet, and it doesn't give a lot of information about her. She was stabbed to death January 8th, 1987, and Bertha Cantu, age 26, which I can't find hardly any information about her as well. And she was stabbed to death June 30th, 1987. So you can see them in this list here. Number 5 is Branscomb and number 7 is Cantu. So, and it was the DNA, I guess, that helped them to solve the crime. And so that John Bill Fletcher Jr., 1987 stabbing deaths of Teresa Branscomb and Bertha Cantu, a rapist. He is currently serving time, so I'm assuming that he both raped him and stabbed him to death. So, and maybe I shouldn't assume, but since he's a rapist, that's... So anyway, right here it says he woke up. He said, I woke up one night and realized these were all women, Hall told Yakima Herald-Republic recently. The body starting adding up in 1980 when Sheila Pearl Lewis's corpse was found near Parker Dam. She died of massive internal injuries caused by being hit by a speeding car. The deaths tapered off in 1992 after authorities found the body of Sherry D. Sampson, Elwell, a victim of strangulation. And I don't know if why. 2 deaths have not been clearly labeled homicide. The 1982 death of Celestine Spencer from hypothermia is considered accidental, but the circumstances remain murky. The 1987 death of Teresa Suezanne by drowning is considered suspicious, and detectives haven't ruled out homicide as a cause. The other 9 appear to be definitely homicides with different methods, including gunfire, stabbing, beating, and strangulation. And I'm wondering why they tapered off in 1982. There is little commonality, said Lieutenant Stu Graham, who heads the Yakima County Sheriff's Office Detective Division. Fletcher is responsible for only 2 of the deaths, Graham said. Hall had a theory that one serial killer could be blamed for all deaths since Fletcher's arrest for 2 slayings. Hall has backed away from the idea. Families and investigators are bolstered by the arrests. These cases should never be closed until you find out what truly happened. It wouldn't be fair to the victim's family, or the community if we allow these things to remain unsolved, said Davis Washines, a former Yakima Nation police chief who served during the homicide discoveries. The FBI is looking at evidence against Fletcher to determine if he played a role in other homicides, said agency spokeswoman Roberta Burrows in Seattle, but FBI won't describe in detail its current efforts to resolve the reservation death causes. So, and then I wanted to look at this while we were here, and it's from 2021, and it says, new sketch release of Parker Jane Doe, found in February 1988. In Yakima County, Washington. After 33 years, investigators plan to exhume her remains in quest to identify her. Yakima County, Washington. The Yakima County coroner has released a digital portrait of a woman whose remains were found in the lower Yakima Valley in 1988 in hopes she's recognized and can be identified. Known as Parker Doe because she was found near the unincorporated town of Parker. The woman was discovered by a horseback rider on February 16, 1988, close to a dirt road that leads from Parker Bridge Road to the Sunnyside Diversion Dam on the Yakima River. She is believed to be native and 30 to 39 years old. Doe was a petite woman, estimated to be about 5 foot tall and weighing less than 120 pounds. The cause of death is undetermined, said Coroner Jim Curtis, but the manner is presumed homicide because of where Doe's skeletal remains were found. Authorities estimated she lay there for around 4 to 10 months. I am prayerful that we may find a presumptive family member for DNA testing to finally identify this person, Curtis said in the news release. Doe remains were buried in 1989 west of Yakima at West Hills Memorial Park, and Curtis hopes to exhume her remains as soon as possible. Her skull was transferred from Central Washington University to the King County Medical Examiner's Office early this summer after concerns were raised about improper storage of potential forensic human remains at the university. Natalie Murray, a forensic artist who lives in Texas, created the new portrait of Doe. The former law enforcement officer has been a leader in efforts to develop and refine digital means of generating forensic artist services, according to her website. Curtis asked those who may recognize Doe to contact the Yakima County Coroner's Office, and there's the phone number. Parker Doe, she lay with her face to the sky when the horseback rider found her on a blustery February day in 1988. Though she was near a dirt road that leads from a busy Yakima County highway, no one noticed her for several months. With a height advantage over people and vehicles, the rider saw her in a brushy area roughly 5 feet from the dirt road, which runs southeast from Parker Bridge Road to the Sunnyside Diversion Dam on the Yakima River. It was early in the afternoon on February 16th, a Tuesday. "I'd say right about here," Bradshaw said as he stood on the dirt road in July and pointed into a tangle of narrow-leaf willow, choke cherry, and shaggy trees along a rusty barbed wire fence. "All of this wasn't here before. We're looking at 30 years of growth." Shaw is a retired detective with the Yakima County Sheriff's Office who worked the case. He came back to the site earlier this summer with the Topanish Police Captain Dave Johnson, a former Sheriff's Office detective also involved in Doe's case, and Yakima County Coroner Jim Curtis. The coroner brought his body-sniffing dog Justice. "It's so overgrown now, but there's a little incline." "She was at the lowest point of the incline," Shaw said. "She was just far enough off the road if you were driving by you wouldn't see her." Back in 1988, Shaw stood on a car to photograph the scene where she was found. After lying there for an estimated 4 to 10 months, only her skeleton remained. She was 4'11" to 5'1", with black hair approximately 12 inches long. Petite clothing remained on her frame. She was not a big lady. She was quite small, maybe 120 pounds, Shaw said. Investigators initially thought she could be 20 to 30 years old, later estimating 30 to 40 years old, and weren't sure if she was Native or Hispanic. Her teeth showed no signs of dental work. Her head was slightly lower than her feet. "I did tip the body over slightly to check and see if there was any dried blood underneath or a weapon, and there wasn't anything," he said. "It appeared to me she had been killed elsewhere and placed there." They call her Parker Doe because she lay near the unincorporated lower Yakima Valley town of Parker. Curtis wants to exhume her from a cemetery west of Yakima as soon as possible because of drastic advances in DNA technology. He is closer than ever to being able to identify her and return Doe to her family. Goal since he became coroner in 2019. "I'll do whatever it takes," Curtis said. "I'm waiting on the cost. As soon as they come up with the cost, we'll set a date. It's going to happen one way or another," he said of the exhumation. Similar cases. Because of where she was found, investigators think Doe was murdered. 2 other women's bodies were discovered in the Parker area months before. In 1987, a paroled rapist who had moved from Texas to Yakima the previous fall terrorized women familiar with the city's rough late-night scene. His name was John Bill Fletcher, Jr., and DNA evidence tied him to the rape and stabbing deaths of Teresa Branscomb, 20, and Bertha Cantu, age 26, in separate attacks in 1987. I wonder what kind of vehicle he was driving at the time. I wish it gave that kind of information. Their bodies were found in the Parker area. Branscomb's remains lay in an orchard about a mile west from where Jane Doe was found, and Cantu at the end of the dirt road almost to the river. Both were last seen in downtown Yakima. Fletcher took 2 other women to the Parker area and raped them. He stabbed one woman 16 times. She escaped, crossed the river, and flagged down a passing car, providing information that led to Fletcher's arrest in August 1987. He was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree rape and 1 count each of robbery and assault, and sentenced late that year, entering the Washington State Department of Corrections in January 1988. Identifying Doe could help investigators answer the question of how she died, which is no small task because what they have on her is in pieces. Her skeleton is believed to rest in an unmarked grave at West Hills Memorial Park outside Yakima. Her clothing is in evidence at the sheriff's office, which is handling the homicide investigation. Her skull was transferred to the King County Medical Examiner's office in Seattle after years of storage at Central Washington University in Ellensburg, where it was taken for a clay reconstruction in the 1980s. Authorities have never extracted Doe's DNA and know they must, said Detective Sergeant Jason Pepper, head of the detectives at the sheriff's office. It's just a matter of time. I think we're moving forward, and I think we're going to get something, Pepper said. Once we get some DNA, I think we're going to be able to identify her. Funding for Doe's exhumation is in place, and Curtis is coordinating with West Hills and several agencies whose officials investigators might attend. They include the King County Medical Examiner's Office, which provides forensic anthropology services for the state, Pepper and possibly others from the sheriff's office, additional law enforcement agencies, and Yakama Nation representatives. Until she's identified, investigators are making assumptions about who Doe is and how she died, but they have good reason to believe some long-held suspicions. The road where Doe was found is within sight of Interstate 82, but some believe she lived in the Yakima Valley or had strong ties to it. From December 1986 to early November 1987, at least 3 women were reported missing within Yakima Reservation's boundaries. 2 were, I don't know why I have trouble pronouncing that word, it just like flies off. Indigent, I just lose the pronunciation for that word all the time, I don't know why. Anyway, I'm going to skip that word. One of them, petite. I don't know why I lose that. It's so easy. Anyway, the third is described as Caucasian and petite. All had black hair. Some investigators also think Doe's possible killer was from the area or had strong ties to it. The dirt road is on Yakama land, and while known to some tribal citizens and nearby residents, it's easy to miss. A metal gate wasn't there when Doe died. Doe's identity will take investigators back to the beginning, to any missing persons reports, the name of those who reported her missing, and relatives and friends, places where she was last seen, and potential suspects other than Fletcher. He wasn't the only one hunting vulnerable women in Yakima Valley. I'm pretty confident that we should be able to figure out who it is, Pepper said of Doe. Then it starts from there. Bowling shoes. Doe wore lavender pants, a long-sleeved lavender shirt with a label in Spanish, and argyle socks in lavender tones. Investigators think she was pulled out of a vehicle by her arms or armpits because her head was furthest from the dirt road, because her feet were closest to it. Her brown shoes were what Shaw saw first. They were unique. One sole was black, the other white, with grooves in both. She was wearing bowling shoes, Shaw said. Performance bowling shoes are made with different soles for each foot. He took those shoes to the bowling alleys in Toppenish and Wapatov, but employees couldn't identify him, Shaw said. There were also bowling alleys in Sunnyside and Yakima, but he doesn't think she was a bowler. A bowler would have never worn bowling shoes as street shoes, he said. She may have bought them at a yard sale, borrowed, or got them from someone else. Shaw was at the scene with others from the sheriff's office, Yakima Nation Tribal Police, the FBI, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Tribal Police, the FBI, and BIA were there because Doe's body was found within the reservation, and she was possibly a native woman. The FBI is responsible for investigating serious crimes involving tribal citizens on reservations. A sheriff's deputy stayed with the Doe overnight. The next day, members of the King County Green River Task Force arrived at the request of the sheriff's office. It wasn't necessarily because they thought Doe's killer might be Gary Ridgway, the the then unknown serial killer who left some of his more than 4 dozen victims near the river outside Seattle. The task force was involved because of its expertise in collecting information at old homicide scenes. When you have decomposed bodies, you process the scene differently, said Ron Ward, chief criminal deputy for the sheriff's office, for a story in the next day's Yakima Herald-Republic. You take more of the scene with you for comparison. A careful search of the surrounding area can yield jewelry that can identify the victim, as well as discarded items or bodily fluids that could provide DNA or indicate how a person died. Shaw had walked around the place where Cantu, the 26-year-old mother of two, murdered by Fletcher, was found in July 1987. Cantu was stabbed several times in her neck and torso, and there was a lot of blood on the leaves and surrounding area, he said. Though Doe lay outside longer, investigators still hoped for more than her clothing and hair. There wasn't anything at all, Shaw said. I checked those bushes. I got down on my hands and knees, didn't find a thing. Who could she be? When Doe was found, Doug Blair was in his first term as sheriff, appointed after the previous sheriff resigned. He started at the sheriff's office in 1974, patrolling the lower valley and around the reservation before becoming jail manager. There have been several female skeletal remains recovered in the lower valley, said Blair, who lives in Kennewick. There were lots of rumors. After the initial flurry of publicity didn't yield clues to Doe's identity, investigators contacted the anthropology department at Central Washington University. Doe's skull was removed and taken to Central, where anthropology students and faculty used clay to create a forensic facial reconstruction sculpture based on her skull's bony structure. Central's anthropology department was a forensic resource when the sheriff's office couldn't get the Washington State Patrol or FBI to process crime scene, Blair said. He unveiled a reconstructed clay model of Doe's skull in a news conference 10 months after she was found. It was the first time the sheriff's office used clay likeness to further a criminal investigation. Despite extensive news coverage, the clay model generated only about a half dozen calls and none panned out. With blankly staring eyes, a shapeless black wig, and nondescript white blouse, the likeness would be considered crude by today's standards. Even some who worked on it weren't sure if it would help. We didn't really get much response, said Johnson, the Toppenish police captain. Johnson was a patrol deputy for the sheriff's office when the Doe was found and became a detective that summer. Though he retired from the sheriff's office several years ago, Johnson is keenly interested in Doe's case. Authorities originally said Doe was of Hispanic descent, up to the point Blair presented the clay reconstruction of her skull. Then they believed she was Native American, but they still don't know for sure. Doe's DNA would answer that question, said Judd Towell, who retired in January as head of detectives at the sheriff's office. He had become familiar with her case in the past few years and brought Pepper up to speed before Pepper moved into his role. We need the DNA to push it. We can't go much further at this point. We've got to have some proof. Is she Native? Is she Hispanic? That's what we need to know, Towell said in January. A search of nameless cases of missing Native, Hispanic, or mixed-race women in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and California shows 2 other Native women missing at that time, one from California and the other woman from Montana, but neither matches the description. NamUs isn't complete either, though it's the most extensive public listing of missing, unidentified, and unclaimed people in the United States. NamUs doesn't have as much information as CODIS, which is the FBI's combined DNA index system. One part of it is the National DNA Index System known as NDIS. It contains the DNA profiles contributed by federal, state, and local participating forensic laboratories. You have 2 serial killers. An autopsy by the King Medical Examiner's Office did not determine the cause of those deaths, said the Yakima County coroner at the time, Leonard Birkenbein. He classified her cause of death as undetermined, and that's still the case, but the manner of her death is presumed to be homicide. Her skeleton was intact except for a few bones in the right hand. Her hyoid bone was also missing. The U-shaped bone is at the root of the tongue in the front of the neck and between the lower jaw and the largest cartilage in the larynx. It's not unusual for the hyoid bone to be missing from a skeleton that has been laying outside for several months, the coroner said, because it's held in place by tissue, which could indicate if a person was strangled. Curtis thinks Doe may have been strangled. Several Native women were strangled and left in remote locations on the reservation in a pattern that still makes people wonder if a serial killer or killers were hunting women they thought would be easy prey. A widely acknowledged expert on the subject, Robert Capel, helped identify Ted Bundy as a serial killer and helped capture Ridgway as a Green River killer. Shaw met Capel and told him about some of the homicides and mysterious deaths, he said. A serial killer is defined as a person who murders 3 or more people, Shaw said. From what Shaw told him, Capel thought Yakima County had more than one. I think you have 2 serial killers, Shaw remembered Capel saying. 1 killing prostitutes and 1 in the lower valley killing Indian ladies. He was quite insistent, Shaw added. I think Bob Capel was quite accurate when he said you have 2 serial killers. Fletcher's preference was a knife, Shaw said, and he stabbed women multiple times. He chose his victims from Yakima's rough downtown, where sex workers congregated near and in Stockman's Tavern, now a parking lot, and the Blue Banjo, which is now the site of the Crafted restaurants. Fletcher is at the Monroe Correctional Complex in Monroe. Through the 1980s into the early 2000s, more than a dozen, and why can't I pronounce that word, indigenous women disappeared and later found dead within the boundaries of the Yakama Nation. Several Native women who disappeared in the 1980s, 1990s, and into the 2000s were last seen at Lower Valley Taverns, sometimes when they were hosting pool tournaments or other special events that attracted even more women. Some of those women went missing from the Brownston Tavern, a rough place for decades before it was destroyed by an explosive fire June 12th. Outsiders weren't welcome, and even law enforcement were told to never go inside alone. I was told that whoever was doing it would go to the Brownstown Tavern and look for intoxicated Native women, Shaw said. He watched the crowd. In January 1993, interview with Yakima Herald Republic, longtime BIA investigator Melford Manny Hall said the same thing. My opinion is that this guy sits at a tavern someplace and waits for an intoxicated woman and grabs her, he said. Some bodies were found on or near Addenham Ridge, which is much more than a ridge. It's a vast area of slopes and deep gullies that divides the upper and lower Yakima valleys. The area is closed to non-tribal citizens, but others have been and are still known to take Brownstown Road north past the gate that's open to go up and atop the ridge, then head down into Wiley City. Over the years, federal authorities have insisted the homicides, mysterious deaths, and disappearances were not the work of a serial killer. In May 2009, FBI officials announced the result of their probe into more than a dozen unsolved deaths on the reservations and reiterate that in 3 cases, significant evidence was developed about the identity of suspected perpetrators, the FBI said in a story. But there wasn't enough physical evidence and witness statements to warrant charges, they said. Time and rough country make investigations even more challenging. As time passes, suspects or persons of interest die, as do witnesses or others with knowledge of crimes. They may not choose to tell others what they know or think they know. Witnesses are often afraid to provide information, and with good reason, many would say, though witnesses can be even more difficult to locate and interview for older cases. The sheriff's office gets helpful cold case tips from time to time. Investigators welcome those tips no matter how much time has passed. So does Yakima County Crime Stoppers, which recently announced an initiative to help solve more cold cases or missing and murdered indigenous women in the Yakima Valley. And even though they may be cold, it doesn't mean you have nothing, Pepper said, making her complete. Doe's skeleton was buried in 1989, about a year after she was found, Curtis said. Her skull staying at the Central at Central after the clay reconstruction in 1988 and was recently rediscovered there after an inquiry from Detective Andre Bloom of the Cadiz County Sheriff. Bloom contacted state forensic anthropologist Dr. Kathy Taylor, who visited the campus on June 25 to examine 13 human remains considered potentially forensic, possibly missing persons or homicide cases. Learning about Doe's skull, which Central called CWU4, prompted her to study the other 12 specimens. Tim England, dean at the College of Sciences, said in an email obtained through a public records request. After her visit to Central, Taylor told Curtis they were going to start analyzing Doe's remains fairly soon. Dr. Kathy Taylor died August 1st. The King County Medical Examiner's Office has contracted with Dr. Laura Fulginiti, I don't know how to pronounce her name, Fulginiti, to continue Taylor's work until a new full-time forensic anthropologist is hired, said Kate Cole, a communications specialist for the Department of Public Health, Seattle and King County. That includes efforts not only to identify Doe's skull, but also the 12 other specimens that the Central transferred to that office. Dr. Fulginiti, Fulginti, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry, I'm chopping up the name, and medical examiner staff are working to analyze the remains, including determining the minimum number of individuals, county of origin, forensic significance, and hopeful identification, Cole said in an email. Modern forensic tools including DNA, radiography, dental charting, and database entry will be utilized in an attempt to identify the remains. Full examination will take time, Cole said, as work continues. Curtis hopes to exhume Doe as soon as possible. That could cost several $1,000s, but as soon as West Hills gives him a number, he will set the date. On the day Doe is exhumed, investigators will gather around the unmarked grave where she is reported buried next to another unidentified woman found in downtown Yakima in July 1977, as they reveal what they believe is Doe's skeleton. Curtis will visually confirm if it lacks a skull. That will answer their first question. Doe's skeleton will go to the King County Medical Examiner's Office for a DNA match with the skull, Curtis said. That will confirm they are the same woman, along with other tests and efforts to identify Doe. Taylor had recommended a digital reconstruction of her face on Wednesday. Curtis released a digital portrait of Doe by renowned forensic artist Natalie Murray. Her portrait of Doe shows a slightly smiling woman with straight black hair and blonde highlights around her face. Curtis hopes a presumptive family member recognizes her and provides DNA. That's one way Doe could be identified. Once Doe's skull and skeleton are scientifically matched and any other tests are conducted, her remains will come to the coroner's office, where they will stay until she is identified and returns to her relatives, Curtis said. I want this family to have closure because I'm sure they are wondering what has happened to their loved one, he said. And here's the links they said they gave for the Yakima Herald where they got the information. Anyway, prayers for their family, and thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day. Bye-bye.